Right. Well, it's good to see everyone this morning, or this evening as well. We'll go ahead and start in prayer. And actually, I thought this comes from the beginning of the commendation, which is the end of our funeral service or our burial service. But again, kind of pulls everything um, into that spiritual piece. So let us pray. Give rest, O Christ, to your servants with your saints, where sorrow and pain are no more, neither sighing but life everlasting. You only are immortal, the creator and maker of mankind, and we are mortal, formed of the earth, and to the earth we shall return. For so did you ordain when you created me, saying, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. All of us go down to the dust, yet even at the grave we make our song, Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. Amen.
Amen.
I start with that. Just it kind of gives some of our theology within the Episcopal Church of death and the fact that that one where that we're immortal and the creator and maker of all mankind, and that we have been formed out of the earth, and we have our earthly bodies that we live in, that we breathe in. But then as death comes and as we meet our maker, as the prayer book says, as we come into the near presence of our Lord and all that, then we return our bodies to the earth and all that, and literally as a thanksgiving offering and all that, returning our earthly bodies to the earth, knowing that our soul, our spirit is there in the near presence of God and everything. So um, today we're going to talk, or this evening we're going to talk a little bit on um, ways of walking this journey as death comes near. And then once death does happen, we're going to jump it over to Andy, and he's going to share some of the practical stuff of what it looks like, and the importance of funeral planning and everything. As I shared with you all last week, it is an amazing gift to have all your ducks in a row, if you will, have things planned out and have your wishes written out for family members, and also they know exactly kind of what your wishes are, and then that they can follow those to the best of their ability and all. Obviously, as death comes near, that's a struggle. There's very and that comes near in very different ways. There's those sudden deaths, car accidents, heart attacks, and things that just we can't just we're not aware of. We can't be ready for. We can have our our all of our um, details in order and everything, but you just never know when those are going to happen and everything. But then there's those other deaths that come gradually due to a disease, due to cancer, and all that stuff. And we've all kind of probably walked with someone in that journey. I know for us, it was my mom, as she battled with ovarian cancer and then had chemo, and then it became clear that chemo wasn't going to be the cure that we had hoped and prayed for and everything. And so then she entered into hospice care and everything, and then came to that time of near death and everything. That was at home. That was back in Albuquerque. Actually, she was a head nurse, or I'm sorry, at that time, she was the vice president of the hospital. And her one prayer was that she would die at home and not in the hospital. She didn't want to die at work, I think. And again, hospice gives people that opportunity and everything. So we walked with hospice. They were amazing. This was back in 95. She died. So hospice was a little bit different than the organized hospice that we have today. It's much more volunteers. But again, hospice is an amazing, I hear too many people say, I don't want to go into hospice because I don't want to give up. And hospice isn't giving up in any way. Hospice is a way to walk with our loved ones, and help them with the pain and everything. But they also give support to the family members and respite and everything. So hospice is an amazing new ministry and gift and everything. So I encourage people to go through that. There's also those that have had some of the accidents or so, and they're on life support in ICU or so. And those are the harder ones because things are more fresh, things are more immediate, and also and just know that when those times come, if your loved one is in ICU and they're on all the life support stuff, we can keep a body alive for a very long time. And then the question comes, okay, is this really life, or is it time to let our loved one go be in the near presence of God? And the Episcopal Church has this amazing new prayer book. It's called Enriching Our Worship. Let me turn off my blur background. Sorry about that. Video. So it's enriching our worship. This happens to be the second one and all that. And this is all about ministry to the sick or dying. And it has a special service for burial of the dead. These are additions to the prayer book that have been approved and everything. So enriching our worship is part of that. And in this book, it's an amazing service. It's a form of prayer when life-sustaining treatment is withheld or discontinued. And it's a great litany, and I've used this many times at different hospitals and with different families and everything, as they have decided it's time to let their loved one go and all that, let their loved one be in the hands of God and everything, and discontinue that life support. This is a way that we can do that in a very liturgical way, in a very prayerful way. And it really, throughout the service, it is just, Lord, we are handing our loved one over to you. And whatever that might look like, we're doing it faithfully. I've had a few people, had a gentleman the other, a month or two ago, send me a text. He goes, I can't believe it. My friend is in really bad shape and is probably near death, and the family's praying for him to die. And I'm like, wow, what a great and fateful time that must be. Hard, but what a fateful way of lifting up our loved ones. And I was able to put him in a different mindset. He was like, wait, you don't pray for someone to die. And I'm like, you know what? Sometimes that's the next best fateful thing to do and all that. And I know with my mom, I remember the day she was laying there in horrible pain and she just said, Brian, can't you just kill me? And all that. And I'm like, Mom, I cannot do that. I will pray for your quick death, but that I can't just put a pillow. And I sat there going, well, a pillow over her face for just a little bit would put her out of her misery now. But again, for me and our family, that was not where we were at this point and everything. So again, there's all kinds of emotions in all of this. There's all kinds of understandings, but the main thing, and we talked about it last week, is make sure that your family knows your wishes and all that. And again, I knew my mom's wish, but I wasn't going to do that. But we did. At that point, our prayers changed, and it's just like, Lord, if you're going to take her now. And I think that is a very faithful and loving prayer to be able to put out there. So just know that there's things like enriching our worship. There's ways of doing this in a very liturgical way. We didn't have this when my mom was sick. This came out, I think, in 2000 or so. But again, it's a great resource. Yeah, copyright 2000 and all. But there's amazing resources out there. And there are ways to walk faithfully with our loved ones as they come to this time of death and all. On our resource page that we'll have next week, there's a video, I think I talked about it last week, of by a doctor, a physician who has worked with people as they near death and all those different types of um, different moments and seeing people, loved ones that have already passed and everything, talking about traveling, wanting to go. And again, we talked about that last week, so I don't want to go into too much more detail, but be aware of those conversations and don't just say, oh, they're on some drugs and they must be hallucinating. Over and over and over again, people of faith or without faith, it's been reported by hospice nurses and doctors and all that and caregivers of just people seeing their loved ones and they know they're coming into that presence and everything. So again, just be really aware of that. There's a great book out, and we'll have that on our resource, Final Gifts, and it's written by two hospice nurses about people's experiences as they near death and all that. And again, come and talk about travel conversations. And okay, I've got to go and all that. I wish my wife would be ready for this trip. And I've shared with, I think I shared last week, there was a gentleman in Brigham City who kept saying, I wish my, used her name, but said, I wish my wife would be ready. We got to go on this trip. And I just visited with him and said, you know what? Maybe this is a trip you need to do on your own right now. And your wife will be with you at when it's her time and all that. She can come later, but maybe this is a trip you need to make on your own. So just kind of be aware of that. There's all kinds of resources. I'd be happy to talk with you all more about some of those resources. But Final Gifts is a great one. And again, there's a video out, a TED Talk about it that we'll have on our resource page. And then I just wanted to share before I jump to Andy, just wanted to share a little uh, um, thing by Sarah Kerr about it says when someone you love dies, and it's a full sheet and everything. And I won't read it all to you, but we'll have it on our resources. And this is when death is expected. This is when someone's on hospice, and the time is coming near, and the nurses and the hospice people have said, okay, your loved one only has a few hours or so. But on those times when your loved one actually dies, when it's expected, when you're kind of as prepared as you ever can be for that, it says expected death. When someone dies, the first thing to do is nothing. Don't run out and call the nurse. Don't pick up the phone. Take a deep breath and be present to the magnitude of the moment. There is a grace to being at the bedside of someone you love as they make their transition out of this world. At the moment they take their last breath, there's an incredible sacredness in the space. The veil between the worlds opens. We're so unprepared and untrained in how to deal with the death that sometimes a kind of panic response kicks in. They're dead. We know they are going to die, so their being dead is not a surprise. It's not a problem to be solved. It's very sad, but it's not a cause for panic. And it goes on a little bit more of talking about just being present. I've been in the presence of people as they have passed, and it is just a very holy moment and all. So again, when it's planned, when it's expected, if you will, and all that. Andy will talk about what to do at the time of death. But the first thing is, again, if it's planned, just be present with your loved one. Take a little bit of time, because once you call 911 or once you go out and tell the hospice nurse that they have passed, things move very quickly then. Well, until you have to wait till the mortuary to show up, and sometimes that's an hour or two. But again, everything starts being put into motion. So just take some time with your loved one and just be present with them, and just soak in that moment. Lift them up in prayer. I've done that with many people as the final time comes, then just to sit and then to have prayer and even have communion and all that. And just know that communion and all that is always available, and that's can be a very holy time to have communion right after our loved ones have died or right before it. So yeah. And there is, everyone always asks, does the Episcopal Church have last rites and all that? We don't call them last rites, but it is the unction and extreme unction and all that. It's prayers for those who are dying and all that, and prayers at the time of death. And it's a great service to go through. And again, a litany to just let our loved one go. So just a few things on the spiritual side of as we come towards the end of our loved one's life and all that, of how to walk that very faithfully, but also knowing that we are putting our loved ones in the hands of God, in the near presence of God. So we'll get to any questions you might have at the end, but I want to make sure Andy has enough time to share a little bit and all that. And so Andy has been gosh, how long have you been at the church, Andy, now?
Uh, Full time since 2008, since love.
2008. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. And he was our junior warden and everything. And he also, I'll let him introduce himself, but also has worked in the funeral industry for quite some time. So Andy, thanks for being here.
You bet. Thank you. So what I want to do is basically kind of go real quick my my history is that I spent 20 years prior to what I'm doing now in funeral service. Can everybody see the screen all right, Father Brian? Is that right?
Yes, we can see
Okay.
that. Everyone else see it? Thumbs up if you can. Yep. All right. Yep. We got it.
So working in the funeral industry from all the way from, doing cremations, embalming, meeting with families. I ended my career as a manager of advanced planning. So looking at what this topic is, it's very near and dear to my heart because in my at-need settings, I never had a family ever come in and said, geez, dad or mom, they pre-planned everything and I wish they hadn't because I wanted to do it. So I think that's one thing that I can really set home is that we really need to figure out how, or actually just take the time to sit down as husband and wife or by yourself. And I've dropped off some planning guides. Every funeral home has it. I had picked up some from the local funeral home here in Castle Rock, and they're personal planning guides. If you just take an hour to fill those out, you're going to save a lot of time and also a lot of emotion for your family. So getting started here is that in the difference between pre-need and at-need, it's all about decisions. And if you can make those ahead of time for your family, that is a huge bonus for them. If it's not, there's a lot of information that's going to be needed. The vital statistics, which is everything needed for the death certificate. I remember meeting with families that we would go through, we need to know dad's full name, date of birth, date of death, number of years of school. And I would say, what about his mom's maiden name? And they would say, we call her grandma. I mean, because they've been up for 24 hours, they weren't ready for it. And so once again, with filling out a planning guide, you're going to take care of all the vital statistical information, and that is a huge bonus for the family. Also, writing down your own issues, no lingering doubts. Did I do the right thing? Is that what mom or dad wanted? No, you're actually going to tell your family what you want. And this is going to eliminate a lot of the family tensions, is that it's so often that we see in a funeral home where the emotions are high. They've, like I said, been up all night, and that's not what dad would have wanted. This is what he wanted, or he wanted this casket, or he wanted to be cremated. Once again, by filling out your own guide, you're going to eliminate those, providing your own insight, whether you want, a memorial service, whether you want a traditional funeral, where you want to be buried. That's all what's important in planning ahead. I remember the dash. This is a poem because what I talk about, I've not only lived it for a professional career for 20 years, of course, took care of my parents, and then also my wife and I, we buried a 14-year-old son. And so looking at that dash was pretty short. Your dash may be 50 years, 80 years, whatever it may be, but the number in the beginning and the number on the end, nobody knows what's in between other than you. If you can share information about what you were proud of in life, write it down, share that dash, because that's history that only you know, and that's something that's going to be able to be incorporated into the services. When we're talking about advanced planning, also what you can do is you can not only go to the funeral home, write down all of your wishes, sign all of your documentation, and you can prepay it. You can prepay it on a monthly plan, you can pay for it up cash. And the big thing with that, you get to lock in the price today. So if a cremation is $2,000 today and it's 10 years down the road, well, guess what? It's $2,000 for your family. That way, all the documents are in one place. And most importantly, no short hops. Because if you leave this to the time of death, the emotions are high, the spending goes overboard lots of times. And it's just, I've never had a pre-need situation that turned at need be anything better than at the time of death. And if anybody wants to ask questions all the way through, just ping up. But just some real quick rules and regulations. Colorado used to be the only state that had no rules for licensure, meaning that anybody could own and operate a funeral home. Of course, we heard all the issues with what happened in two or three funeral homes throughout the state. Legislation has now changed that, and so what that's going to happen is basically now in the next couple of years they're going to do licensure like all other states. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually a good thing, but I think over time what we're going to have, as Father Brian talked about, waiting for a funeral home to come, the impact of the death of the baby boomers is just going to accelerate, and the staffing is going to get tough just because a licensed funeral director, you got to go to embalming school, then you got to take the national board, etc. So those things are going to change. It's going to have an impact to our funeral homes. 24-hour rule, basically just says that upon death, that a family, like if I'm working at the funeral home, we get the call from the family, from the hospice, from the coroner, whoever it may be, that within 24 hours, somebody must either be buried, cremated, or refrigerated. And that's the state rule. With that is that, once somebody elects to be, say, cremated, the big thing of it is that all equal next of kin must sign the cremation authorization. So in a situation of husband and wife, that's an easy scenario. Then if you have one remaining spouse, and let's say there's 3 or 4 kids, then all children must also authorize that cremation, unless you pre-authorize ahead of time. And you can do that with the funeral home. There's also a disposition authorization page that I've given Libby that you can write down and record that this is what you want to have done. Even though the funeral home may have somebody co-sign that authorization, that's the important thing with cremation. Everybody thinks it's the simplest. Actually, it's the most complicated when there's a second death and multiple children and nobody can agree on it. Interment rights at the cemetery is based on your deed. You just can't have anybody buried in a grave that you own unless you sign off on the interment right. If somebody is a veteran, in order to be buried in any national cemetery, the only thing you really need to do that, because of your commitment already to our country, is provide the funeral home with a DD 214 that actually gets you the authorization to be buried at the national cemetery. Number of DCs, lots of times people say, oh, we don't need one, we only need 1, 2, or 3. I always tell folks is that if you think you need 3, order 5.
Hey,
Because if you,
Andy, what's a DC?
death certificate, I'm sorry.
No, I
Number of death certificates, just once again, make sure you have enough because everybody's going to need the original, or lots of times you can present the original and get the original back, but more is better. Just types of services in today's world, you have your direct cremation, direct burial. Also with cremation, there's the standard funeral home where they have all the amenities and they're going to have the direct cremation, but also there's direct or cremation societies. That's all they do. They don't provide anything other. Lots of times it's a storefront, but you may pay $2,000 at a funeral home and a cremation society may be $1,000. So do your research and figure out what you want to have. Once again, cheaper is not always better, as we've seen what's happened throughout our state. So do your research ahead of time, go out and visit with them, or most importantly, get a referral from somebody that you know. Memorial service or celebration of life. Now the big term is celebration of life. That everybody wants to have the so-called party, if you will. A lot of people are spiritual, not religious. They're, maybe they don't have a church, So as you see some pictures coming up, the funeral homes today, all of them are removing all the pews and they're putting in high boys with 4 or 5 chairs around it, and they're having some big gathering, if you will. So once again, for those that want that, that's available, or having more of a traditional memorial service. Memorial just meaning basically the body isn't present. There's also just having only a graveside, and you have the traditional funeral, and then also you have traditional funeral followed by cremation. That's kind of the direction I've always done with my family, is that you have the true traditional funeral, you got the viewing, you got this the service, and then instead of going to the cemetery, you go and have the body cremated, and then your wish is to either inter the cremated remains into a cemetery or whatever you want to do.
Andy,
Um,
a quick question, if I may. Maybe I'm
sure.
confused. I thought I heard you say earlier that there's a new state law that within 24 hours after death, that a body must be either buried or refrigerated or cremated. And now I'm hearing you talk about the possibility of a service prior to cremation. Can you clarify that?
Sure. Sorry about that. So once there is a death, you either have to be buried, cremated, or refrigerated. The big key there is that if you're going to be cremated, then refrigeration must take place up until that cremation process. If you're going to have a traditional funeral, then of course you must be embalmed. So within 24 hours, I guess that's where I missed.
Okay. Now
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Now I understand the
Yeah.
distinction.
So the embalming is taking the place of cremation, if you will.
Got it.
Did that help you out there?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
And presumably, I mean, that's handled through the funeral home.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, and then of course, most all funeral homes are now coming full service with reception services where they have, catering there, just like, us going to the Gap, but the funeral home's just trying to stay relevant to offer that. Here's an example as you look over there on the top left, is that, just creating memorabilia, that basically reflects the life well lived. This one happens to be a cremation with memorial service. You see the urn surrounded by pictures and flowers. To the right there is a typical new chapel at a funeral home. And you can see once again, it's tables and chairs, no pews. The one bottom left is a reception/chapel at one of the cemeteries here in town. And even the funeral homes are actually offering unique transportation items. This is actually a funeral home where I used to work at here in town, where they actually have a Harley Davidson coach. Back where I live, we have a horse-drawn coach. So when you go to the funeral home, every funeral home is required to give you, whether you're advanced planning or at the time of death, they're required to give you a general price list, and that's going to itemize all their services that they charge. The FTC now is imposing a rule that all funeral homes must also list the majority of their general price list actually online, which a lot of them already do. It's no really big deal, but that's the one thing at the funeral home that you're going to see as far as a general price list. Cemetery, they don't provide any price list, if you will. It's all going to be, discussed at the time. In the general price list, every funeral home must offer and provide a cost for a direct cremation or a direct burial. This cost does not include the urn or the casket. It's just the service fee for the funeral home. Next one they'll have to provide is a memorial service option, a graveside, a traditional burial, and then the alternate is the reception services for like food and beverage packages. So the the FTC does regulate every funeral home, whether you're licensed or not, by the general price list. And you can call up any funeral home and ask them to send you a packet, and they better send you a general price list.
Andy, if I could, I assume it's all right to interrupt with questions.
Absolutely.
For cremation, when my mom died, I don't know, 15 years ago, she was in Florida, and she was cremated, was her preference. And the funeral home there and her preference was to have her ashes deposited in the Gulf of Mexico, which was similar to or identical to what my dad had done years before. The funeral home there had a temporary container for the ashes. It was actually something that was designed so that it would dissolve in the ocean. What are the options for? You've referenced urns. Are there? I assume there's a variety of types and levels of permanency of urns, depending on whether a person wants to have the ashes in a columbarium or kept by a family member, or have the ashes dispersed back to nature. Can you clarify that a little bit, please?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Is that lots of times with the direct cremation, it will come with what we called a temporary container, which is either made out of plastic or cardboard. And that's like if somebody's going to go scatter, they would go and actually scatter the cremated remains wherever the loved one wanted to be, and then the container is discarded. From that, the arrangement of urns are from a bronze urn down to a wood urn, all in between. There are ones that actually some funeral homes do offer, the ones that actually will disintegrate in water. So, the gamut, depending on the funeral home that you choose, is going to offer a huge selection of urns. Also, what they're going to offer is keepsakes. So a lot of folks will go out and they'll provide, they'll go out and get the cremated remains, and they're going to bury them at a cemetery, but they want to split up a portion of the cremated remains to each family members. Personally, when I was in the business, that kind of didn't register with me. I mean, it kind of creeped me out a little bit with all the different keepsakes that were around. But when our son died, our daughter, we were getting ready to go for the burial of the cremated remains, and Elise said, "Does Logie get to come home with us?" And I went, "What?" Because the only thing that she knew about was having our dogs that died, and the cremated remains came home from the vet. So we had, it used to be a big fight. Who gets to keep the cremated remains in their room of the dog? So right away, I called the funeral home and I said, "Hey, John," I said, "I need to hold some cremated remains back." And Elise went in and she picked up a keepsake, which happened to be a necklace with a cross. And some of the cremated remains were actually put in that cross. So there's the gamut of offerings for keepsakes, urns, what have you, are pretty widespread when it comes to selection, depending on the funeral home that you choose. Does that help?
Yes, thanks. I'm sorry, I was muted. That's very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, Andy, if I can jump in real quick, also, remember or keep in mind where the burial is going to take place, such as in our at the church in our columbarium. All it is you get a plastic box that has a bag inside of it, and then that bag goes into the columbarium and everything. So there is no cost of an urn and all that. And again, unless you do some of the keepsake stuff. So again, I think a lot of it pertains on to where that final burial resting place is going to be and all. So yeah, just be aware of that.
Yeah, and then and that's, especially, and just like the church, there's a lot of cemeteries that will actually require their own type of urn to go into their niche banks. So So once again, at the cemetery, there's no real general price list. You have the different lots or graves or niches, mausoleums. Lot is, of course, is a grave, uh, earth burial, if you will. Niche is anything that's holding cremated remains, generally up above ground. And the mausoleum, of course, is a traditional casketed burial above ground. Edith would ask me about, different types of burial options outside of the traditional burial. In the state of Colorado, you have green burial. Green burial basically means that you can be, some cemeteries and some sections allow you to be buried without a vault. Most cemeteries require a vault unless you're in a Jewish cemetery. There's the natural organic reduction, which is human composting that's available in Colorado, as well as, alkaline hydrolysis, which is water cremation. Once again, there's just, there's so many different options. If you're interested, do your research. It's a lot of people look at the whole human composting side of things. That's just another way of using that process that a natural crematory or retort does in an hour and a half, where water cremation takes about 8 to 9 hours, my understanding. Human composting is 6 to 8 months. So do your research. I'm not an expert on that at all. At the cemetery, when you buy a grave, you're going to pay for endowment care. Endowment care is basically a fee that goes into every grave purchase that then is put in there. The cemetery is supposed to take, prudent measures to invest that and to keep care of that. And that's the endowment care to actually take care of the cemetery forever. When you buy a grave, lots of times you're not going to buy opening closing fee. The opening closing fee is generally charged at the time of death, or it's a cash advance. As far as on your arrangement contract, pre-arrangement, they also, as I said earlier, require a vault or a liner in all perpetual care cemeteries. Once again, this is basically the concept of to eliminate grave sinking. So they can go in and they can, take their equipment out over the cemetery without any faults. The vault is basically the casket goes in and there's a top and a bottom to it, where a liner is over the top, and there's generally no liner. So it's just, it's up to the person selecting it. And then, of course, at the cemetery, you have your marker cost, which is, either upright or flat, depending on the cemetery requirements. Give you an idea, here's some quick pictures of a traditional cemetery. Some of you know Crown Hill. That is just the one on the left is a huge mausoleum that includes traditional burial casket as well as cremation. The one on the right is an outdoor mausoleum, as well as a shot of an indoor mausoleum. Then also at the cemetery, you have a memorial park section, meaning the one on the top left. That just means that every marker is flat. As well, then on the top right, you have your traditional upright headstones. You got your private mausoleums, and then you've got different types of wedge markers. Actually, the top or the bottom left is a section what's called a lawn crypt, where actually when you buy the grave, you're buying ahead of time your liner and your vault, if you will, that's already preset into that section. Probably more information that you wanted to know. This is now the up and coming. I mean, you look at cremation rate. Actually, today what I do is I'm in the financial services business. I actually track and cover all the consolidators, the death care companies like SCI and Carriage, where they report right now. Service Corp reported that their cremation rate nationwide, they own 1,700 funeral homes, is 57%. There are funeral homes that I work for locally here at Haran-McConaty that we had a couple of locations that were 90%. Everybody is now moving in the funeral service world to these new cremation gardens, where the offerings are these outside gardens where it offers a variety of different ways for memorialization. I'm telling you, folks, that the offering at Christ Episcopal Church for the niches, you will never find it more or less expensive by far than there. It's just, I mean, if you're looking for a single niche in the garden that I created that I'll show you here in a minute, you're going to spend a minimally of $2,000. What's a niche at the church, Father Brian?
The new ones we have are right at 1,000, so half of that.
Yeah. So
And you
this
get to
is
be with all the saints. Sorry.
right. So this is the garden that I helped create. And once again, this is 1 acre. It has so many different options from, you can see top left, along the walkway, you've got pavers, you got memorial bricks, you got upright columbariums, lawn burial, everything that you can imagine in between. Other ideas that are here locally, Seven Stones is this place. It's out in Roxborough. A buddy of mine created this, and it's the most unique cemetery you've ever been to. You have memorial benches. You buy a family bench. You can put all, like where the Pena family is, you have, looks like there's probably 9, probably 18 spots for family there. Memorial bricks on the bottom left. Epitaph plaques where, let's say you're going to cremate the body, scatter in the mountains, but yet you want to have a focal point. There's an option there, top left. So today, the big challenge for funeral homes are their goal is try to stay relevant. That's why they're trying to create these reception centers. They're trying to get away from the pews, creating that celebration of life concept, helping people really create the ceremony around their hobbies. I remember doing a ceremony one time and the guy was a golfer. I went out and I said, you know what? We're going to go out and we're going to buy, 5 dozen or, 5 cases of golf balls. And at the end of the ceremony, we're going to ask everybody to come and pick up the golf ball, take it home, go out to the range and hit one more in memory of Billy. Stuff like that. That's the key. And that's the challenge of these funeral homes, because once again, that there are a lot of folks that just want to just take death and put it underneath the rug. And they think, oh, we don't need a ceremony. Well, in my case, my point is that remembering a life well lived is really important. You will never probably see a casket selection room. And I don't know if any of you have had the old days of walking in, you see, 15 or 20 caskets all sitting on a plastic bier. Well, there's probably not a traditional casket room in the whole state of Colorado. They're all done by video or book. So as Father Brian talked about in his opening remarks, the best thing you can do when death happens is huddle. Get your family together, get grounded, realize you don't have to make arrangements the next day or the next day. Take some time. Get your family members involved from the standpoint of who's going to help me with writing the obituary, who's going to write, help with picking out the scriptures, who's going to, get together with all the pictures and maybe create a memory board. We did memory cards with Logs where everybody, wrote down what they remembered most about Logan. And those are things that we have in a book and we'll have for the rest of our life. Just those memories that are actually imprinted that somebody took the time to write in memory of our son. Online obituaries, you're not going to see, if you look at the Denver Post tomorrow, there's going to be 3 obits in there, maybe 4. But the fact of it is everything's now on their website or on legacy.com. COVID impacts, thank God that the COVID impacts have remained, because what's happened is that a lot of times you don't need to go in the funeral home, especially on a pre-arrangement standpoint. You can do everything online. You can do DocuSign. There's a lot of stuff now that basically technology came advanced, 10 years over a 2-year period with COVID. Once again, the conversation about the golf ball, when you have a funeral, creating the memorialization around the urn, the casket, to memorialize who that person was. Life sketch, that is, I feel, a very important selection for every family to make. And that's to assign somebody, not necessarily a family member, but maybe somebody step back, maybe it's a nephew or whatever, or a friend, that will give up and give the life sketch, which includes, reading of the obituary, but it's encompassing the dash. Who was this person at work? Who was this person at church? Who was this person as a dad, as a husband? And once again, having that person part of that ceremony that you can find is once again an important part. But only you that are listening here tonight can figure out who you want to be or who you want to have give your life sketch. I guarantee if I asked my wife right now, she would have no idea unless she looked at my book and my guide. So marker memorialization, memorial trees, once again, those are just ways to help memorialize the life well lived. And I think I'm out of time, but I'm open for questions or any thoughts. The guides, Father Brian, are going to be at the back of the chapel, or you have them?
Yeah, we have the planning guides that Andy has given us. There's probably 50 of them there or so. But yeah, we'll have some in the back, in the back of the sanctuary. We have the little things that can go on your refrigerator, the red ones that have your DNR stuff and everything. And then we'll have these some back there, and then we'll have more in the office. Absolutely.
And I tell you what, if you want to give, it's a husband and wife listening here, if you want to give your wife or your husband, and usually it's us men that says we're going to stick our head in the sand, we don't need to talk about it. If you want to give your significant other or spouse a gift of a lifetime tomorrow for Valentine's, fill out one of those guides. It will save hardship for your family. I can't tell you how many families I've seen come into our funeral homes and never spoke again, because they just blew up over stupid things, and it could have been addressed with 1 hour of filling out that guide. So happy Valentine's Day.
Nice. I like that, Andy. You want to go ahead and end your share screen, and then that way everyone can be on the same page.
Yeah.
But yeah. Questions, thoughts, concerns?
Andy, this morning we talked about some of these logistical kinds of things, and you gave me a form that we'll put in our resources. What did you call that?
It's a declaration of disposition. And really what that form is for, Libby, is that if you have a situation where, if I want to be cremated and I haven't documented that at the funeral home, or don't want to go do that at the funeral home, you can basically fill that out, and that will document your wish to be either cremated or buried, services, no services, and who you're going to assign that to. And basically that is a document that the funeral home can go off of to proceed with that disposition and that request. So it's kind of an encompassing document to make sure that, if especially a lot of times there's family issues where there's, nobody can, my sister and I can't agree where to go eat, let alone what we want to have for my mom or dad's funeral. So it's just something you just need to be able to fill out, put in your file. And once again, that's going to save a lot of hardship.
And when we were talking about that today, a question came up that I really had never thought about, but I've always had the tissue donor little heart on my license, driver's license.
Correct.
And it got me thinking, well, what does that mean? What's going to happen at the time of death? And we weren't really sure about that. So I'm thinking that'd be something good to investigate a little bit. But I just never thought about how that fit into all that process. So
Right. And I think that, when there's a death, generally, the hospital is going to, or the coroner is going to ask you whether or not, it's one thing to be an organ donor, right? I mean, that's got to be a special situation. But lots of times there's a lot of people that want to be a tissue donor. And that's where they're going to ask, the family at the time. And then the family's going to say, yes, my mom actually had that on her driver's license.
yeah,
She wants to be a donor. And it's up to your conversation with them whether or not you're organ only or tissue or both.
right.
Can you clarify the distinction between being an organ donor and a tissue donor, please?
Yeah, tissue. So organ donor, of course, lots of times, when you're brain dead, then they can use your organs for life savings transplants. Tissue donor is basically they'll go in and they'll take the tissue, whether, I don't know exactly the process, but they're going to use a lot of your ligaments and stuff like that to go in and harvest, and then they're going to use those for procedures for other people, from ACLs or whatever.
Thanks.
One note too, as we were talking about urns and everything, and it's probably one of the biggest surprises I think as people walk in families walk in for the service. Just know that in the church, all urns and or caskets are always covered. It's called a funeral pall. It's a cloth that goes over the urn or over the casket as it goes into the church. And some people are like, wait, no, we have this beautiful urn and we want everyone to see it and all that. The theology of that in the church for a church burial is that we are all equal in the eyes of God. It doesn't matter if it's a cardboard box or the fanciest casket that you can buy and all that. In the church, it's all equal. And when we've had one a little while ago that the family really wanted. It was a really nice urn. It was hand carved and everything. And so we can display those, if you will, at the reception. But during a funeral service, the urns are always covered in the church and everything. And again, with that theology of it doesn't matter what's under there, we're all equal in God's eyes. So just a heads up.
Father, thank you
Um,
for that.
eh,
May I just say one thing, that I know of a person who donated his body to science. And so what he did is he called the CU Medical School. I was helping him with his 5 wishes document. And one of the things he told me was that he wanted to donate his body to research to be a cadaver for the medical students, et cetera. And so he researched it and got in touch with CU Medical School, and they directed him as to what to do. And so anyway, that's one thing I wanted to offer. And then the second thing is that when I was a chaplain at University of Colorado Hospital, we often had to help with the paperwork for tissue donation. And so that would be done at the time of death. And it included, Al, I think you're the one who asked the question about that. What is tissue? And
Yes.
it can include bone, corneas, skin, and other tissue in the body. I mean, it's just the list was unbelievable. It always was surprising to me, but really comforting in a way that we could give the gift to another person upon our death.
Great.
So
Esther,
anyway,
I think.
just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Esther, I think you had a question.
I have 2 questions. One is, it's a memorial service if the body is not present. How about the ashes? In other words, if the ashes are present as a funeral or a memorial service.
It actually, with that, we've done celebration of life as ashes are present. We've done memorials, we've done burial services. It's all within the church. It's all the same service that we do, other than if there's no body or ashes, the commendation at the end there doesn't happen and everything. So yeah.
But Father Brian, is her question is the fact that in the Episcopal Church, isn't the urn kind of required to be present?
Nope. No,
No,
we do
not
celebrate. Yeah, yeah. Most of the time it is, but no, it's
right.
not required to be present and all that. We don't do the commendation prayer at the end if that's the case.
Okay.
If it's not present.
Okay, and then my second question is for Andy. You talked about cremation authorization. I have in my will that I want to be cremated and also in my trust. Is that good enough?
No, it's not in the fact because the will is going to be read much time later after the death. So your best thing to do, Esther, is to fill out a disposition form that Libby has, or really more importantly, is meeting with the funeral home and signing your own cremation authorization. And that takes care of everything, no questions asked, no concerns of the family at all.
So do they keep that or do I keep it because I don't know where I'm going to be when I go?
Right. So that's the value of the disposition form, is that that's something travels with you and you can give a copy to the funeral home of your choice. But if you don't know where you're going to be at, if you're moving around or whatever, then that form travels with you versus if it's going to be somewhere here in Castle Rock and you want to use XYZ funeral home, I'd strongly recommend putting your wishes on file with that funeral home. Even if you do put it on file with the funeral home and you happen to move, then lots of times that they will take that authorization and actually accept your signature depending on the funeral homes. I mean, some funeral homes are, it's such a legal situation because, it's finality. So, the funeral home is going to want to cross their I's and dot their T's. So that's my recommendation. Fill out that disposition form that Libby has. And if you have a chance, go to the local funeral home.
Andy, does that need to be notarized, the
No,
disposition, or just signed, or just a witness
signed and witnessed.
witnessed? Okay, but not
Yep.
notarized. Okay.
Yep.
And
Thank you, Esther.
Andy, if we filled that out and just kept it with, our papers and whatever at the time of death, is that good enough or does it really need to be with a funeral home?
No, you just in your presence is fine.
Got it.
Then you
Just
just
make sure
take it in at the time of need and present that and send, here's Libby's wishes, and they'll probably have somebody co-sign that authorization, but they're going to act on your request.
Just make sure your family knows where that booklet is.
Right. Yeah. It's the box.
Because if they don't see it, then
Whatever. Right.
Yeah, a quick story is that when I was in my early days, actually doing this funeral planning, just, somewhat door to door, if you will. And they said, well, where do you think I ought to keep all this paperwork? I said, put all this in a Ziploc bag and put it in your freezer. They're like, what? Guess what? Nobody will ever forget that they told you that my wishes are in the freezer. And so, but, no, I don't recommend that, but make sure that it's all there. And in today's age, you can scan it and file it and put it on a hard drive.
yeah.
Carrie
Go
and
ahead.
well, actually, I did it because Carrie puts his head in the sand. We purchased what is called a knock box, next of kin box, and it's got places in there with keys, things for your passwords, your will, your insurance, all of that stuff goes in there, and it's in a fireproof box. And I sent a picture to my son so he knows what it looks like. And that's where they need to go, is just to that box. It should have everything in there. We've already prepaid for the funerals, so they know we want to be cremated.
That's great concept, because I think that's where in today's day and age is that who really knows where, the authorization for the bank account, what the login is and how are the bills being paid? Is it through Quicken or whatever? I mean, the more information that you can sit down and fill out is, believe me, is so beneficial.
My dad has a notebook, and all three of us boys know exactly where that is and everything, and it's filled with everything. Sometimes I sit there going, "How about if someone broke in and got that notebook?" So you got to keep it very safe. But yeah, it's just make sure your family knows how you've done it and where it is.
So, Andy, you've been in the business, and Father Brian, you've certainly dealt, I'm sure, with many funeral homes. How would you recommend that we go about researching and selecting a funeral home in advance?
Well, I look at it most importantly is that a lot of funeral homes today, we're focusing on Castle Rock. Andrews Caldwell Gibson was a local funeral home forever. Now they are part of what's called Service Corporation International, or the Dignity brand, which is a large conglomerate publicly traded company that, basically owns, I don't know, probably 35 funeral homes in the state of Colorado. Are they better than the mom and pop shop that is located next to Angie's? I think the most important thing, Al, is that you've got to ask the community, ask your priest, who have they had inner workings with to figure out which is the most, viable option for you. Will it change? Potentially with ownership changes. I worked for Haran McConaty for a lot of years. They're no longer Haran McConaty. They're a part of Parkalon. So once again, a lot of the guys that I worked with over the years, they're no longer there. So things are going to change. But I think depending on what you're looking for, I would look at who has the facilities. And that's one thing that I look at more importantly is that a full service funeral home may cost more money, but once again, they've had the investment to stay there, be relevant, and be around versus somebody that's going to open up a storefront and be gone tomorrow. I don't know if that helped you at all.
Yeah, it did. Thanks. And we can have a private discussion with Father Brian on that offline.
Yeah, I've got some, I've worked with folks, but actually, especially early on here in Castle Rock, many times I'd be in a hospital with family members who have just lost one, and I'm texting Andy going, "Okay, who are the funeral homes I need to recommend?" and all that. But now, yeah, I've worked with enough people that they're all, most of them are very good and all that. So yeah, cool. Other questions, comments? All right. So next week we'll have our guest speaker looking more at the financial and legal end of things and all that, getting our finances in order, and also, and that'll be our last one. Again, each of these are being recorded. We will put those on that web page with a bunch of different resources and everything, including that 5 wishes document and all that. It's a sample document, but it shows you kind of what's in there and how you can go about getting an actual one. And those are, again, just another sample of ways to make sure that all your wishes are being written down and being shared. We also will have the prepare your own, your funeral preparation at Christ Episcopal Church and all that. That's on, will be on there. And I can always sit down with you and go through different readings and hymns and thoughts that you might want to kind of plan that. And we encourage people to have one of those with all your paperwork. And then also we keep one at the church. So when I get a call from a family member saying, "Well, we don't know what mom wanted," I can go through and say, "Well, we do happen to have this on file." And so this is a great starting point. So, all right. Andy,
Yeah.
thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and if I could end, please take time for your family, for your spouse, for your significant other. to fill out that paperwork. I've just seen too many horror stories, too much stress, and too many relationships break up just because somebody didn't take an hour to fill that out.
And tomorrow is Valentine's Day, and we
That's
do
right.
have those on my desk. So if you want one for Valentine's Day, swing by the office and we'll make sure you get it. I like that, Andy. That's a good Valentine's gift to give.
There you go.
All right. Well, with that, why don't we go ahead and close with the Lord's Prayer? So, as our Lord and Savior has taught us, we are bold to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Let us go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks
Amen.
be to God, everybody. Thank you all.